Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. Today is March 8th, 2025. Now let's get to the news and map updates happening in Ukraine and Russia, shall we? We'll cover the good updates and we'll also cover the bad updates for Ukraine and Russia. So first I want to start with the good, and that is of course Pokrovsk and the entire front line in eastern Ukraine is more or less stable. Thankfully, the Ukrainians were able to stabilize the situation and also take advantage of what I believe to be the fatigue that we're currently seeing the Russian military in this direction. After over a year and a half of constant Russian pushes, starting with Avdiivka and northern Avdiivka towards Toretsk, we're seeing that the Russians are becoming very exhausted. We've already talked about multiple times that in the very further parts of what Russia controls, close to Pokrovsk, they have to resort to using donkeys, horses, bicycles to move supplies, and they're also reusing injured and disabled soldiers to storm Ukrainian positions, hoping to continue with this momentum of offensives, trying to fatigue the Ukrainian defense, but that is not working. And so thankfully what we're seeing in the last few days is that the Ukrainians were able to retake certain positions around Pokrovsk and break the Russian momentum. I've already talked about it over the last few weeks that certain villages were taken back by the Ukrainian forces, including Peshchane, Lesivka, Dachinske, Kotline. You can see there's a new one here, Uspenivka. The Ukrainians pushed the Russians out of this western direction, west of Pokrovsk. And around Kurakhove, more south of Pokrovsk, you're seeing that the Russians are pretty much stuck in the same situation as 2 weeks ago. They did a massive offensive towards the village of Ulyakli. And so, unfortunately, they did take the vast majority of this small village. But right now, they're still bogged down here. And you're seeing that there's very incremental and small gains by the Russians. And as a matter of fact, not even gains. They've been pretty much stalled. They have stalled in this specific area. So the Ukrainians, I can say with confidence right now, have been able to stabilize the situation. Of course, it's very dynamic and things can change like this. But I'm seeing a lot of positive signs that what we were expecting as the worst case scenario in late 2024, seeing how the Russians just continued on pushing, gaining territory. And yes, it was, a few dozen square kilometers every 2 weeks, but it was still very important. And it felt like within spring of 2025, they would take Pokrovsk. And what we're seeing right now is the complete opposite. The Ukrainians were able to stabilize the situation and launch some of their own counteroffensives. I've already talked about this position northeast of Mirnograd and Pokrovsk, this important interchange that connects Mirnograd and Pokrovsk to Konstantinivka. The Ukrainians retook that a few weeks ago. So again, we're seeing a lot of positive signs in this direction specifically. In Toretsk, there's also some good news. Deep State hasn't updated the map. We'll have to see over the next few days if that holds true. But a lot of reports are indicating that the Ukrainians have launched recently, in the last few days, a counteroffensive in the center of Toretsk, and they have retaken kind of the northern parts of Toretsk, closer here. And the Russians are complaining that they just lack drones here, and the Ukrainians are flying 24/7 FPV drones, reconnaissance drones, different other types of drones, and they're always hitting the Russian assaults here. So they're saying that they just don't have an answer right now in Toretsk and also Chasiv Yar, which the Ukrainians have been holding for many years now. And it felt like last year, you may remember in the spring and summer, everybody was saying that the Russians are going to take Chasiv Yar without a doubt. Look at them. And they're still fighting for the city that essentially is completely destroyed. A few days ago, by the way, the Russians launched an offensive. I think it was the northern district of Chasiv Yar. They used about 25 to 30 vehicles. And here again, the Ukrainians were able to destroy the majority of these vehicles and also the infantry that was used. Some of them were able to land in the northern districts of Chasiv Yar. So right now the Ukrainians are doing a cleanup operation, and the Russians are again complaining here that they don't have any drone dominance, and the Ukrainians are freely flying and destroying one by one the Russian soldiers that are attacking here. So overall, the situation between Chasiv Yar to Kurakhove is stable. Things are very dynamic, as I said, and we know that unfortunately with the United States and Trump, that pretty much confirmed that he's stopped the flow of weapons and aid to Ukraine. This can change over the next few weeks/months if this continues to be the case. We're seeing that Trump, unfortunately, has sided with the Russians. He perceives the Russians as the strong side, and he feels like, pushing Ukraine to compromise is the easiest way to end this war. And as I've said so many times, unfortunately, Trump is putting an equal sign between victims and aggressors, and same for allies and enemies. There is no difference. And so for him, it's all about how can I extract the most amount of gains and benefits out of any situations. But what we're seeing as well is that there's a lot of pressure internally, even within the Republican Party. If I'm to talk about the Trump situation, a lot of Republicans are telling Trump that this is a terrible idea. You need to, reopen the flow of weaponry and aid for Ukraine. We cannot do that because we will look weak in front of the world. But to be honest, they already do. The US, unfortunately, already looks weak and broken. But the silver lining behind this is that we're seeing, I've talked about in my live stream, $800 billion rearmament plan for the European countries over the next few years. That is just the beginning. And we're seeing that Europe is waking up very, very quickly, and they don't have a choice because they know that they're going to be next if they don't do anything about it. So all this to say that the situation around this area is stable. The Ukrainians do have some momentum, and they're able to do small counteroffensives in certain directions here. So that's very positive, in my opinion. And we're seeing that the appointment of the new general, Drapate, has done wonders for the Ukrainian military here. He, as I said, he's the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian land forces, newly appointed since late January of this year. And he fosters really a culture of truth, right? Tell me what is currently going on. Don't twist the truth. Don't lie about it. I want to know exactly what's going on, and I won't punish you for it. And that's really one of the best perks you can have as a commander, where you just need to have the facts rather than invent yourself, victories. So that's one of many positives behind Drapate, but one that has helped the Ukrainians here look at things pragmatically, realistically, and see how they can stabilize the situation. So now we're seeing that this is happening, and this obviously is combined with a massive Russian fatigue in this direction. Another good update I want to give you guys is in the north, in Kupiansk, the Kupiansk direction. Here, the Ukrainians, remember, I've talked about it I think last week, where the Russians managed to cross the river, the Oskil River, close to Kupiansk, and set up a bridgehead. You're seeing that the Ukrainians managed to regain some lost territory. Again, nothing massive. This is not a counteroffensive of 2022 by the Ukrainians, but you're seeing that here they were also able to push out and drive out the Russians from a certain area around the village of Zapadne. So a small little update here as well. But the last thing I wanted to talk about before I end the video is on a less positive note, and that is Kursk, because in the last few days, I believe the Russians actually transferred a lot of their manpower from other directions to Kursk, and that's why we're seeing them in Kursk having big gains right now, and being able to drive out the Ukrainians out of certain positions. So you're seeing that in the last few days, there's been a lot of territorial gains by the Russians in Kursk in the past week. As a matter of fact, you can see the development. First, most of the Russian gains have been in the western side of Sudzha. This is where they're having a lot more success. I think it's partly because it's open fields and there's less areas that are easy to defend here. So for the Russians, of course, with their meat wave assaults, it's a lot easier to push here than in forested, the kind of hilly and forested areas, and also a lot of rivers in this direction in the east. It's a lot more harder for the Russians to have gains here. But you can see the territorial changes in the last few days in Kursk. But there are some positive things as well. Apparently, the Russians a few days ago used a gas pipeline to try to sneak into Sudzha, and they used about 100 Russian soldiers, and the Ukrainians today confirmed that they were able to eliminate all of them. Thankfully, the Ukrainians learned from that. That's not the first time that the Russians are using a pipeline or a sewage pipe to sneak in to the Ukrainian position. But thankfully, this time the Ukrainians apparently were prepared and they were able to eliminate the vast majority of the Russian soldiers that were trying to sneak into Sudzha. Additionally, you can see here around Guyevo-Plekhovo, massive Russian and North Korean assault took place. Apparently, the Ukrainians are mentioning that they're now settled in this forested area, but you can see that this is a huge valley in which they're kind of trapped in. And I saw a video today of a North Korean unit that apparently got lost somewhere here, and they were fully eliminated with Ukrainian cluster munitions and drones. So I believe that this could be a trap by the Ukrainians because it's so easy to close it off. You can see that this is a huge valley, and for the Ukrainians, it's just a matter of closing it. And they do have artillery, of course, and FPV drones, so it's very easy to eliminate this Russian presence here. We'll see how that develops. And also, you can see that on the western side, unfortunately, in the last few days, the Russians were able to push into the village of Lebedyivka. So the pushes continue. And I have to be honest with you guys. I think that we need to be prepared for a possibility. Right now, it's refuted by the Ukrainian military, but a possibility over the next few weeks, months, if the pressure continues, for the Ukrainians to withdraw from Kursk. I don't want this to happen, but it's better to withdraw and save the lives of the Ukrainian soldiers, some of the best ones in here, to fight for another day. And I'm hopeful as well that the Ukrainian military has already been building fortification lines, trenches, and has been setting up traps for the Russians in the eventuality that they decide, and it's very likely that they would, if they are successful to retake the entirety of Kursk, to attack northern Sumy. And it's not going to be an easy job for the Russians because you can see that in this direction, very forested, a lot of hills as well, a lot of small low hills. And there's also a lot of rivers. It's similar territory compared to Kursk. And I'm assuming that the Ukrainians already did some work here and that they have a contingency plan if something like that was to happen. The Russians just double down, continue. Well, of course, they will double down. They will continue pushing, and they continue moving more and more troops from other directions and forming new brigades to attack Ukraine in Kursk to try to retake it. So we need to be prepared with that, and I still don't see this as a failure. I think this offensive by the Ukrainians last year was important. It broke the Russian momentum in certain areas. And either way, if Ukraine would have launched it or not, the Russians already had plans to attack Sumy. So this was just to prevent the Russians from doing a Kursk operation of their own. So I think that this has reaped a lot of benefits, and it broke the myth that Russia cannot be attacked, Russia cannot be invaded, cannot be occupied. And it embarrassed truly the Putin regime. I've talked about it so many times, but the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of refugees that this created, of unhappy Russians that had to leave their homes, that had to witness the reality of the war for themselves and tell it to other Russians, that also has huge implications as well. There's a lot of things that we can cover about the positives and the negatives of this offensive by the Ukrainians, but I do believe that there's more positives. And if push comes to shove and the Ukrainians need to move out of Kursk, they need to do it when it is safe to do so. And I will support that. And I think that, at the end of the day, if I have any lasting comments about it, is that the Ukrainians, a nation of 35 million people right now, is able to pull off these types of offensives and defend itself against a nation of 140 million people, one of the most armed militaries in the world, that was thought to believe to just, swallow NATO in a matter of a few months. And you're seeing that after 3 years, we're entering the 4th year of this war, and the Russians simply cannot even drive out the Ukrainians out of Kursk, right? It takes them months, if not maybe in a year. But you're seeing the struggle within the Russian military, and Ukraine has unraveled that myth, that illusion that Russia is the strongest military of the world or one of the strongest ones. So I think that there's a lot to be proud of here, but we also need to be realistic and not try to keep Kursk for symbolic reasons. You guys can let me know in the comments what you think about what I just said here, but I think that if it's going to be a very critical situation, I think the Ukrainians will have to pull themselves out of Kursk. And I've said that even back in August of 2024, when Ukraine launched this offensive, that this could be one of the scenarios, right? Hold on to the territory, hold on as long as you can, inflict maximum casualties, and just withdraw to better positions in northern Ukraine and just defend this territory. So guys, a huge thank you for support. Again, if you want to help the Ukraine military, I have a few links below to which you can donate to various drone funds, which helps the Ukrainian military eliminate as many Russian soldiers as possible, as many Russian occupiers as possible. Your help is the most important right now. We're seeing that the US is not interested in supporting Ukraine, unfortunately. We're seeing that the US is destroying historic alliances, and so we can only count on ourselves. So please continue helping, if you can, the Ukraine military, the Ukraine people, whether it be military aid or humanitarian aid. It is absolutely crucial that you step up and all of us step up together, and we can make a difference if you multiply that help by millions and millions and millions of people. Thank you so much, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Slava Ukraini!